Okay, there we go. So hello everyone, welcome to our Brain Awareness Art Forum. Let's go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay, so this is what's on our agenda today. So first we're going to start off introducing ourselves. We're going to go into the relationship between art and neuroscience, give some examples, and then open up the floor to any contestants that want to share their artwork. So starting off with introductions, if every officer could just introduce themselves and then say what school they're from, that would be great.
Hi everyone, my name is Aditya Mittal. I am representing American High School's Neuroscience Club. Yeah, excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Tanishka Menon. I'm representing WHS Neuroscience Club.
And I'm Ria. I'm representing Mission San Jose High School Neuroscience. Okay, and so basically all three of our high schools are part of this initiative called the Brain Awareness Collaboration. So it's basically this hub for any FUSD student that's interested in neuroscience. You can get published, learn more about neuroanatomy, complete fun activities, and then also look out for our contest winners, which will be posted on the website also. Okay, and so basically I split the whole subject into two parts. So first we have the brain's reaction, so like what actually happens in your brain when you create or experience art, and then we have neuroperception, so how the brain actually recognizes art. So starting off with the brain's reaction. So first I want to kind of clear up this misconception between the right and left brain. So it's kind of this old theory in neuroscience that the left brain is more analytical, whereas the right brain is more creative, like the hemisphere is more creative and related to imaginative thinking. And this is actually wrong. This has been disproven. It's actually, creativity is governed by multiple regions that are across the hemispheres. So there are three networks that control creativity: the executive control network, which activates and operates when a person needs to focus; the default network, which is related to brainstorming and daydreaming; and the salience network for detecting environmental stimuli and switching between the executive and default brain networks. And you can see in this image here, all the different networks have regions that are across the different hemispheres. They're not just concentrated in one. And then art also activates the anterior temporal lobe, which is involved in the higher order conceptual integration of information in relation to objects. And so to kind of break this down, this is basically your brain's ability to recognize objects in art. So for example, if you look at this picture on the top right, from your past experience, you know that brains generally look like this, like they have two hemispheres, they have a bunch of squiggly lines, right? So that experience lets your brain know that what you're looking at is probably a brain, even though it's not 3D, you're able to conceptualize that. And so then being creative also raises serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. So that will boost your mood and actually lead to healthier sleep. It can also lower cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So this is why art is often used as like rehabilitation or even therapy, because it's known to improve cognition and lead to both better mental and physical health. Okay, and then moving on, art can trigger memory, emotions like pleasure or fear, and processes that allow people to attribute meaning to new information they absorb. So here the structure is related to this first point. We have the hippocampus, which is responsible for learning and memory. So for example, if you're sitting down to draw something and you might smell the scent of the crayons that you used in kindergarten. And so that would trigger your memory, and that might actually trigger your emotion too, and the amygdala is the center for that. Then we have the prefrontal cortex, and so this is the center for higher order thinking. So this is what allows you to actually find meaning in artwork. And then we have the anterior cingulate cortex, and this is known for numerous things: emotion, empathy, decision-making, impulse control, all of that. So then art can also increase blood flow to the brain by as much as 10%. And then there's this really cool concept called embodied cognition, where basically mirror neurons in the brain can turn things you see in art into actual emotions you can feel. So if you're looking at like a painting of a desert, you can actually feel the desert heat or like the sand underneath your feet. And that's due to embodied cognition. And then lastly, there's this concept called neuroplasticity. So that's basically the brain's ability to adapt and change in response to new experiences and new stimuli. So art can create changes in neural network connections and increase cognitive flexibility. So basically, the more creative you are, the more art you create, you're widening your ability to come up with more creative solutions to analytical problems. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to be talking about neural perception, how the brain can see lines, faces, colors, luminance, and shadows, which obviously is super important when it comes to looking at some of your beautiful artwork. Okay, so some of the brain structures that are used in this concept are, of course, the eyes. So the eyes are one of the most important anatomical parts of the brain in the sense that it is one of the largest sensory input mechanisms in the human body. So the eyes, as we all know, allow light pigmentation to enter the body, which are then used in the brain to sort information. So this leads us to the rods and cones. So both are individual cell types that are located in our eyes, which allow different levels of light to be absorbed by the brain. So rods are the cells that detect low levels of light, whereas cones detect high levels of light. And this beautiful interaction between rods and cones allow us to perceive depth. They allow us to look at art, and they allow us to just look at all of the beautiful art that you guys have submitted. Now, in the actual brain itself, the occipital lobes take care of the actual detection of the art based on the information that has been given from the eyes. So it takes the input from our rods and cones and forms thoughts about it. Now, interestingly enough, the optical illusions and most optical illusions work via disturbing the balance of light that is entering with the rods and the cones. So for example, a certain optical illusion might allow certain levels of light to hit your cones when it's supposed to hit your rod. So for example, rods are used to detect low levels of light, but the image actually orients itself in a way where high levels of light falls on your rods. So different ways to think about your optical illusions via biology. Now, one of the most common effects, and this in itself is an optical illusion, but one of the most common effects that your brain can use is called the Gestalt effect. So, as it says here, it is an effect overseen by the brain in which the brain starts to group shapes, lines, and objects together. So, as you can see in the top corner, this diagram depicts a little interesting thing. When you first look at it, it appears to be a triangle. But if you look closer and look at it just from surface level, there actually is no triangle. So this is a perfect example of the Gestalt effect, as it can be seen that the human eye merges three singular objects to form a triangle. Now, the functioning of the Gestalt effect depends on the brain to analyze visual information as a whole, and our brain sorts to construct a recognizable object. So in a way, our brain is very lazy in the sense that it looks holistically at a image. So when we're seeing these three independent circles, we sort of group it all together. And this in itself is the Gestalt effect.
Okay, so some examples of art in neuroscience are these two studies that I found. For experiment one, it was conducted by Professor Samir Ziki, and he was basically just trying to find how does art impact our brain, whether it was negatively or positively. And that goes back to what Ria was talking about how it really affects our brain. And so what he did was he scanned the brain during an experiment and showed a random selection of people a painting every 10 seconds and measured the blood flow from the brain. And the results were an immediate reaction, which was an increase in blood flow for almost 10%. When shown a beautiful painting comes a response similar to the response of seeing a loved one. And so, sorry. So experiment number two is actually one of my favorite studies done. It was conducted by a neuroscientist, Robert Solso, and he was looking to answer three questions. One was what neural activity occurs in the brain during the act of art? And then what brain structure comes into play? And then is there a difference in the structural activity in the brain between an experienced and a non-experienced artist? So what he did was he monitored the brain, just like Samir Ziki, and there were two groups. He asked an experienced artist, Humphrey Ocean, to be monitored, and then a random non-experienced artist that he found drawing the same portrait that Humphrey Ocean would be drawing. So the results on the next slide. So what he found was that, so these scans are of a horizontal cross section from the top. I labeled the top as experienced artist, and then the bottom was the inexperienced artist. And as you can see, A is where they were first shown the portrait that they needed to draw. And I kind of highlighted the general area of what's called the fusiform face area, which is basically what is like triggered when someone is looking at, like, for example, this portrait to recognize a face and perceive it. And so this is a very general highlight of it. It's not exact in any way, but as you can see in A, when they were first shown the portrait, both the experienced artists and non-experienced artists were stuck kind of in that area. But as you know, they continue to start drawing the portrait for B, C, and D, the scans showed that for the experienced artists, their the activity in their brain actually shifted to the right, like frontal area, which was the area that is that helps with thinking and like cognitive parts of like logical thinking and analyzing how he was basically going to draw this portrait. But then for the inexperienced artist, for B, C, and D, he was still stuck in the fusiform area, not understanding how he was going to continue the drawing, right? So you can see how what the areas were triggered. So the areas that were triggered for, you know, the different artists. And yeah, I thought that was very interesting. And then the next slide is just examples of more neuro art that people have done. Yeah.
Okay. So moving on, I'm going to open the floor to any contestants who want to share their artwork and maybe explain the significance, and then also make sure to introduce yourself before you get started.
May I go?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, let me share my screen. Oh wait, can I share my screen?
Yes, give me 1 second. Let me stop sharing. Okay, there we go.
Oh, it still says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, sorry. Let me fix that.
Can you see my screen?
Oh, yep, you're good. We can see it.
Okay, so hello, my name is Neha Sharma. I'm from John Hopkins Junior High School, and this is my artwork. So I joined the competition for fun and because I was interested in neuroscience, but I wasn't aware of too much knowledge. So this is just like what I know. So this is kind of a side view of the brain, and I chose some of like the main lobes and chose different like drawings to represent what each of them do. And I know that a lot of these lobes have many different functions, but I just chose one thing. So over here is the frontal lobe. I drew someone sad because to represent emotions, and then I drew this face to represent happiness, which is like also associated with emotions. And then over here is the parietal lobe for sensory information. So I drew a hand touching the brain to show that, because that's like touching something which is sensory information. And then this is the, excuse my pronunciation, I'm not sure how to say it very well, but occipital lobe, which is for seeing things. So I drew an eye. And then over here is the cerebellum. So I drew balance because that's what it's associated with. And then the brainstem for the heart rate. And finally for auditory info, it's processed in the temporal lobe over here. So overall, that's my artwork.
Oh, I love it so much. Like you can like clearly see what each lobe does, like the different objects like they each represent the function of each lobe. So it's a great overview to like look at, and then like you see what each part actually does. So great job.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that's all we have for today. Everyone, thank you so much for coming out. And then make sure to check out the Brain Awareness website. Where we'll be announcing the winners there, and then we'll post the artwork there too. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.